We're good.
All right, so we're going to begin with active engagement, and this is domain three. So we're going to take a look at some theories. And remember, just like with our students, it's not enough for you just to watch this video. It's not enough for us just to watch that video. And then bam, you're going to know what behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism is, and know what it looks like in the classroom and how to like perpetuate that. Um, that's not enough. We have to do that cognitive exercise, talk about it, put it in our own words, and write it down. That cognitive exercise, that metacognition, questioning yourself, like, what do I understand about my thinking? Thinking about your thinking, very, very important as we go through each of the modules and anytime you are studying on your own. It's not enough for you just to read something critically. You have to ask yourself, and you have to know, chunk it in manageable chunks, not a whole module. I'm not going to do this whole module and try to paraphrase it. That's preposterous. It needs to be in manageable chunks. And so I have some students here that have not yet passed their content exam, and they're here with us for the first time. And they're here specifically for this section, the ELL foundation, and honestly, that pedagogy, providing that support during instruction. What are we doing? What have we thought about before we even began? And how are we implementing it? So let's begin with the learning theories.
Learning theory explains how people learn and how they incorporate experiences to expand their own knowledge. Let's overview three main theories: behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism. In the theory of behaviorism, learners are viewed as passive participants in the learning process. The mind is regarded as a blank slate. The learner makes associations between stimuli and response that result in new or changed behaviors. For example, if a student doesn't study for a test and makes a bad grade, they will change their behavior by studying for tests in the future. Cognitivism views learners as active participants. The theory believes that learners internally process new information by making connections to existing knowledge. For example, during a unit of study on fractions, a student may participate in a lesson about partitioning shapes into equal parts and mentally connect that new information to an experience slicing a birthday cake into equal parts at a party. From then on, every time the student divides food evenly, they will know fractions are being represented. In constructivism, the learner is also viewed as an active participant who constructs knowledge of the world based on individual experiences. For example, a student may think soil is just dirt. Then they engage in the experience of collecting a bucket full of soil and sorting through it, identifying rocks, twigs, parts of plants and insects, and construct their own knowledge that soil is actually a complex mixture of many pieces of. Another important learning concept to be familiar with is transfer, which is the ability to use knowledge or skills in new situations. To illustrate this, let's imagine a young student learns how to write a proper, complete sentence in language arts instruction. While working on a social studies assignment later on, the student uses complete sentences to respond to question prompts. The skill has transferred to a situation other than the one it was originally learned in. Let's take a look at our learning theories one more time. Behavior.
Okay, so theoretically, skills are going to transfer, but we have to provide them with opportunities for them to practice in that transfer, the language skills, social emotional skills, even grammar skills, like they're speaking about here. It's up to us to provide them with opportunities to transfer the knowledge that they've learned into meaningful chunks, in branching out on their own. But that's not going to happen organically. Like, we have to plan for it. We have to provide those opportunities for transfer.
Let's take a look at our learning theories one more time. Behaviorism views learning as behavior changes that occur due to response to stimuli in the environment. Cognitivism views learning as connecting new information to existing information through mental processes. And constructivism views learning as knowledge built through experience.
Okay, I know it's going to shuttle us somewhere else, but before we leave, I want you to unmute yourselves. What do you think, especially what we talk about, what best practice is? What is it a mixture of? What do you think is the best representation of what we do or try to do on a daily basis?
Cognitivism, maybe. Like,
Every day we are trying to connect to prior knowledge. Absolutely. There's so much cognitivism in the foundation of our pedagogy, right? In the foundation of how we instruct, because we know how important it is to get students to make connections between what they already know and what's being taught. And then we also know that we have to build background knowledge if those things don't exist, right? And so in that case, the student is a little bit more passive. It's just not always the case, but is it necessary to build background knowledge to give the knowledge to the student before they enter the learning activity? Yes, we absolutely do that. And do we also and this is sort of like the bestest practice is when you are giving the student sort of ownership in their learning. It's more student centered. The learner themselves constructs the knowledge. That's that's the highest level of achievement that we strive to attain, but we exist in cognitivism. What is the goal? Constructionism. We know that if you learn something because you pieced it together, because you identified it yourself via experience, that is going to be more meaningful than if I made a connection and then we read about it in a book. If you had to piece it together and all of the connections of your knowledge were through experience, that's more meaningful. We know that via experience through life, via adulthood. You can have your friends tell you this relationship is really, really bad, and you're going to continue on it, but until you live through it and you construct it piece by piece, sometimes that's what's necessary. And honestly, that always illustrates best for our students. Is that always attainable? No, but is that the goal? Absolutely, it's the goal. But every single time, we're going to be building background knowledge for our students. And sometimes that background knowledge doesn't exist. I remember when I was a new teacher, I think I've been teaching like 2 or 3 years in PSJA ISD in the Valley, and our student population were predominantly from colonias, and so we had a huge population of emergent bilinguals, a huge population that had not only not traveled, they hadn't left the Valley, right? For family reasons, immigration reasons, whatever. They hadn't left. And so in the state exam, they in the story that they tested all of our students from the colonias in Las Milpas, no, it wasn't Las Milpas, it was, I forget what it was called, their particular one, so that was a different one. In any event, they um had a question, and it was so unfair because they didn't have the prior knowledge. It talked about snow. The story was about a kid or kids going sledding. These students had never seen snow, they'd never touched snow, they'd never walked on snow, and there was some vocabulary that was commiserate with the experience of snow. And it was super difficult. All of our students, most of them, many of them, got it incorrect. And so for us, when we took, like, we can't fight against the state and what they ask our students and whether it's fair or not. We need to find a way to get them to experience more than what they've experienced, even for their assessment purposes, for their written assessment purposes. Um, and so luckily with the advent, hold on one second. Luckily, with the advent of the internet and really just expanding our ability to show students what the sound of crunch, because when I first started teaching, we didn't have the internet in schools. I know that makes me sound very, very, very old. I'm actually not super old, but when I started teaching, it was just so different. Like everything was done by hand. The grade book was like, even before you got the kids out of the classroom, you made sure you took that grade book with you outside of the class because if it burned down, all of the attendance, all of the scores, everything is in your grade book. And so that was very, very important. We did attendance by hand. We didn't email parents, we sent home letters or we sent interpersonal mail. It was just very, very different. And so our students had less access to things and their ability to know things was honestly decreased. And that was opened up so big with the internet. Like I could show you what the crunching sounded like specifically. If I would just wanted to do the word crunch and it just wasn't eating, it was also walking that was crunch. And those things have just been opened up for us. But it's our job. If there is a deficiency in student knowledge because of their geography, because of whatever limitations that pose themselves, it is our job to build a background knowledge before we go into the instruction. You are not going to be successful if you have not done that. If your audience, if your student population, yes, Little Mexico, that's correct, Little Mexico. Nice students. And honestly, I had to break rules. Oh, I won't even tell you those stories. But those students will jump, all students will jump over the moon for you if you believe in them. They will reach heights, go from being a beginner EB student to passing their state exam if you provide them with the conversations, with the opportunities, with the supports in order to reach those things. They can and will do those things for you. Um, but we've got to build the activities. We've got to remove barriers. And that means knowing my students come from Little Mexico and they are going to need a lot of pre-teach and vocabulary, more so than our native English speakers. There's sometimes been words that weren't highlighted by my textbook in my textbook to be like focused on and highlighted before we read the text, but I knew my students and I knew that there were more words. So we would have not, instead of having 4 or 5 words, we'll have 10 words before we start reading this passage. But my students are going to have better understanding because I spent that time going over those 4 or 5 extra words. It's never just one way, guys. It's never just going to be behaviorism. It's never just going to be cognitism, and it's never going to be constructionism. It is going to be a blend, and we are always striving to be here, but the student has to kind of know some things to be here, right? And that's where we're learning and you need this is the in my graduate studies, the idea of the blank slate is it's called tabula rasa, and that means blank slate. That's the idea that a teacher just goes and pours everything into your brain. Like what I'm saying is just like pouring into your brain. You don't have to make connections. You don't have to connect to the real world or have conversations. That's not the way learning takes place. We know that. Does some instruction need to be a type of pouring and modeling? Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to provide those new stimuli and those models of example. But our goal is always to move to constructionism, where the students are doing the bulk of the activity, the bulk of the work. And that's when you know you're winning at teaching. If you can fashion your classroom to where they're doing the bulk of the work and you're just support, man, I not even I have reached that. I've had classes where I've or activities or lessons where I felt like that's gone that way. But to get to that level where you're on that 100% and the students are 100% self student centered, it's very, very hard. Is it optimal and theoretically best practice? Absolutely. Absolutely. And we try to get there. And as long as we are always trying, we are always mindful of what our students need, what activities they need to build the skills that they currently lack because of our assessment, then we're doing our jobs.
Learning a new language is a complex undertaking. English language learners are tasked with learning to listen, speak, read, and write in English.
You guys know I always say that our emergent bilingual students have the hardest task, hands down. I don't know if I could do it. I do not know if I could go to Germany and even sit in a pedagogy class and try to participate and not feel like a dum-dum because I couldn't explain and I don't understand. I fancy myself a smart person in pedagogy, sort of an expert in it. And I would, without language, my knowledge is sort of nothing and I start from ground zero. Our students that come in that are speaking a different language have a huge task that all of them just reach if they have the support. They are tasked with listening, speaking, reading, and writing in a totally new language. They are also tasked with performing with their native English speaking peers. Let me say that again. With their native English speaking peers, performing content wise. It is a huge task. Can they do it? Absolutely. Have I seen them outperform their native English speaking peers once they get to advanced high? Absolutely, almost every single time. But they need our support and not just in English language arts and reading, because that's what I taught. And as I mentioned before, I've been teaching for kind of a little bit. And when I started teaching, the way in which we dealt with our emergent bilingual students has very much gotten better. Like we did a very poor job in the early 2000s, and I don't even want to think about the 90s or the 80s and what the expectation was. But in the 2000s, it was up to your English language arts and reading teacher to make sure you had conversations, to make sure you practiced speaking because your math teacher wasn't going to do it. Your science teacher wasn't going to take special care to make sure that you understood because you spoke a different. That was English language arts and reading. But it is everyone's job. PE, your theater, your math. You want your students who I would venture to say that if you were to test them just on the academics, just on the academics in their home language, they would knock it out of the park. It is not their deficiency in the content. It is that they don't know another language and they are currently being measured in content standards, academic standards in another language before they have mastered proficiency. That is a huge task. And if you're someone who is developing your brain, like your EC through six, or if you're someone who's developing your identity, like you're a middle school, high school, it can be detrimental if it doesn't go well. If people are not supportive, if you're in a classroom, last week we talked about the classroom culture. If you're in a classroom where you might get made fun of if you misspeak or if you don't understand. And that is unacceptable towards student progress and unacceptable to our goals. So just keep in mind our ELO students need so much support, not because they are deficient or don't know, it's because they are learning a whole different language, but while being measured in that same language. Huge task. I don't know that I could do it myself and not have my self-esteem take a really, really big hit. And I'm an adult.
And there are several components of the English language that work together to lay the foundation for language learning. Vocabulary refers to the words used in a language and what they mean. Grammar is the overall system and structure of a language. Syntax refers to the word order used to form meaningful phrases, clauses, and sentences. And mechanics are the rules that govern written language, such as capitalization, punctuation, and spelling rules. English language learners need to develop English proficiency not only for success in school, but also for success in social situations. It is important to provide instruction that allows students to practice both academic and everyday language. This can be as simple as providing opportunities for peer interaction and discussion, as well as targeting content area vocabulary.
Also, having conversations with your students. Hello, Paloma, how are you doing today? How was your weekend? What did you do this weekend? Like forcing them to say, especially if you know they're beginner. Beginners need those basic interpersonal communication skills. Those are the first skills that we build. So if you know they're a beginner, you better be having extra conversations with them whenever you can. I would ask the lunch ladies to have conversations with my students, engage them in conversations. Anybody who would engage them in conversation was going to be an extra exercise in oral language proficiency, an extra exercise in listening skills, and an extra exercise in speaking skills. The more, the merrier. Myriad, multiple, manifold, millions of opportunities. So I'm going to be talking to you every single time there's a weekend. I'm going to ask for a whole rundown. I'm going to ask for the rundown of your weekend. Because even though we're not talking about poetry or grammar or syntax, it's important to their language development based on where they're at. And our, you know, ELPS standards, we know that they are beginner, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high. And our beginner and our intermediate students are gaining proficiency in the BICS, the basic interpersonal communication skills. That is everyday language. Me saying, Miss Sauceda, I have to go to the restroom, or my stomach doesn't hurt, or my stomach hurts, or I don't understand this. Those are just like basic things. Or I went to the movie this weekend. Our beginner students don't have the language even to tell us my stomach hurts. I don't feel well. So we need to be super mindful of our emergent bilingual students that are beginner, not just academically, but absolutely academically, because they don't have the words to tell us they don't understand. Checking for understanding, that hyper monitoring, checking for understanding, but also with their emotional needs and well-being. I know I have a video on YouTube. I don't expect anybody to watch it, but it is a video of me reading a book, and it was written by an emergent bilingual student who went through the American school system. And she's now a bilingual teacher in New York City. But she talks about her experience and how just like tiny mistakes, and I know they weren't on purpose. I know they weren't meant to hurt her, but they were just mistakes that made her experience terrible, like not telling her how to get lunch and explaining how lunch went. And even though her lunch was the country she came from was totally different, they never had anything like that. So she didn't eat. She didn't eat until somebody at some point noticed she wasn't eating and didn't know how to get lunch for herself. And so just little things that our students, when they barely come over, they don't even have the language to say, I'm not eating every day, you know? And so it's our job to have conversations with them, try to build the language every day. I don't care what content area you are, you're not English language arts and reading, cool story, it's still your job to help build language proficiency, and it will make everyone's life easier. The faster they gain language proficiency, and I'm telling you, it has been, and I'm a researcher, and I haven't taken any sort of statistical data, but my personal experience is that our advanced high students, that once they unlock, and that's because they have more access to vocabulary in their home language that is a synonym to a word in our language, which most people don't use, and their writing is just phenomenal. As an English language arts and reading teacher, my high school advanced high students wrote like my graduate level peers on that level. And you can bet your bottom dollar that I would tell them when they wrote something and it was like, it wowed me. And I showed them exactly what it is that they did. But our emergent bilingual students can do what our native English speaking students can do, and often better. they just need support. And it's all hands on deck when it's language building. Once they go home and they're back to the home language, they're not going to have that practice. It's not enough just to be done in one content area. Everybody has to be mindful. And the way you can be a super teacher is not just when you're planning, don't just have a learning objective. A learning objective is necessary, and obviously it's the foundation of your lesson plan, but you should have a language objective. That'll have you in compliance with sheltered instructional practices, the SIOP training series. If you, every single time you have a learning objective, are mindful and you say, this is the way we're going to use language around that learning objective. This is how we're going to listen about it. This is how we're going to read about it. This is how we're going to speak and how we're going to write about it. And have that in the forefront of your mind. You will do such a huge service of support for your ELL students. Have a language objective, not just a learning objective. Every learning objective, you should ask yourself, how am I going to further my students, my EB students' language knowledge? And honestly, it's not just your emergent bilingual. Some of our native English speakers have very low oral language proficiency. I'm not sure what the reasoning is. I don't know causation, but it's a thing. That's not just a thing in Texas, it's a thing all across the United States of America. Oral language proficiency among Americans is low, which means that they can listen and speak about limited things across the board. And we can expand that by providing those opportunities, by providing our lessons or infusing our lessons with ELL supports always. I have always said ELL supports and special ed supports are best practice for everyone. For everyone. We should treat everyone like they're emergent bilingual, like they're ELL, like that's how we should build the lessons because everyone benefits from more vocabulary being explicitly explained. Everyone benefits from more background knowledge being given before entering instruction. Everyone benefits from illustrations and visuals, before we begin. Those things that we do for certain populations, they certainly are best practice for everyone, but they are necessary for those special populations.
through tools such as a Freyer model. An effective way to improve language acquisition is to give a variety of opportunities for the student to listen to, speak, read, and write English at their current proficiency level, while gradually increasing the difficulty of the language tasks. Repetition is
And so when we have beginner students, intermediate students, and we're going to put them in a speaking scenario or a writing scenario, what are some supports we can give them if they're going to enter something with a diverse group? What are some supports we can give emergent bilingual beginner students and intermediate students to fare well in a speaking or writing exercise? I'm asking you guys. That was a question. What is our best practice that we can do? Oh no, hold on one moment. I have a student
key.
that's
Student
sorry, that's trying to get in, and I know I sent it. Sorry, guys. I apologize just really quickly. Oh no, what's happening? Yeah, I'm not sure. I know I sent the email earlier today. So what I was looking for as I'm sending this, what I was looking for is actually sentence stems. And you should have viewed or you should have read the ELPS instructional strategies. Here, I'll bring it up for you guys so you can see it. That's not it. the ELPS instructional strategies tool, which really goes deep into each of the levels of proficiency. And it's here in the ELL resources. And it's this one here, the ELPS instructional tool. It's my favorite to look at language proficiency um, regarding support. There's so much regarding just definition, defining what it means to be targeted. What does it mean to be systemic in your instruction, systematic, and it gives us real examples of how you can be focused, how you can be targeted, and how you can be systematic in your instruction of ELL students. So if you haven't already looked through the ELPS instructional guide, I highly recommend it. All best practices, pre-teach academic and social vocabulary, building background knowledge, carefully crafting those ELL groups so that you are sprinkling in supports and that your um, cooperative learning groups are useful to each other, that it's a meaningful exercise. Okay, so let's continue.
Students benefit from repeating the same activity until the language skill has been mastered. Let's use a simple listening activity as an example. To teach a student what sharpen your pencil means, first say the phrase, then demonstrate. Repeat the steps until the student is able to hear the prompt and complete the task with no teacher aid. Provide students with lots of opportunities.
So using your body to help build language understanding is called PPR, no, total physical response. And so you are physically acting out whatever it is. So, like sharpening the pencil, we would want to show them sharpen the pencil and then say sharpen the pencil so that it makes that real world connection to what I'm doing and the language.
To hear English words with visual cues for understanding. So remember, give English language learners a variety of opportunities to listen, speak, read, and write in English.
Always, every day, always listen, speak, read, and write in every single activity that we do. You should be having them listen, reading about something, thinking about it, writing about it, and then talking to peers. That's why I love Think, Pair, Share so much. Like I am a Think, Pair, Share crazy person all the time. And you might go to your right or you might go to your left, just how I'm feeling, but I've carefully crafted everyone around you to be useful.
Miss Sauceda.
Yes.
At an elementary I worked at, there was a bilingual elementary, and they would do like they will alternate days. So Monday was English, and then Tuesday was Spanish, and the whole campus would participate. So like what you're talking about, like listen, speak, and what is it? Read and write, or
Yes, absolutely. Listen, speak, and read and write. That's right.
yeah. So the whole campus would do it like they would say the morning announcements in English and then in Spanish, and then that reminds me of like what you're talking about. It reminds me of like what I went through at that campus.
Yeah, it
Like
sounds like it sounds like they had a strong dual language program.
right,
Yeah,
yeah. I
absolutely.
mean, just wanted to share that. Yeah.
And that's great. And it's important because our a new language can't be built on an incomplete language.
Préndela, mija, como quiera, préndela para que se caliente.
We want for them, especially when they come in early or early child, to fully develop their home language, like the mother tongue. That's important. It's important to the development of the second language. And so campuses like the one that you were talking about right now are really good about that, are really good about making sure that we are solidifying, and they're also good for students learning a second language because it might seem like out of place in America, but in other countries, they teach three, four, five languages. And our students are capable of it. They really are capable of absorbing just on based on our activities, based on what we plan and what we instruct. So let's talk about continuing with active engagement. We're looking at, I don't know why, we're looking at types of sentences and grammar. I know they might ask some things, but honestly, they're not going to ask so much about it. But we do need to understand basic grammar, basic syntax, because we have to be able to help our students do basic syntax, right? We want to be able to help them write and complete sentences, use the coordinating conjunctions. I used to teach these by singing for and not, but, or, yet, so. There was like a little song, and we would say for and not, but, your, et, so. So little different ways to remember these things, and we learned them all when we were little. So we're going to watch it briefly and then move on.
You should be familiar with the 4 different types of sentence structure. By mixing these into writing, authors can illustrate different points effectively and vary the reading tempo. Before we get into the 4 types, let's review the difference between an independent and dependent clause. An independent or main clause can stand alone as a sentence. They can be found in all types of sentences. The lion roared at the hyenas is an independent clause standing alone as its own sentence. Giraffes eat acacia leaves, but koalas eat eucalyptus leaves. Contains 2 independent clauses. They are connected by the coordinating conjunction but. A dependent or subordinate clause begins with the subordinating conjunction. It cannot stand alone as a complete sentence. It requires a comma if the clause is at the beginning of the sentence. In the sentence, my shoes are brown because they are covered in mud. Because they are covered in mud is the dependent clause. Because is the subordinating conjunction. In the sentence, since they are covered in mud, I must leave my shoes outside. Since they are covered in mud is the dependent clause. It is followed by a comma since it's at the beginning of the sentence. Since is the subordinating conjunction. A coordinating conjunction connects grammatical units of equal rank, such as 2 independent clauses. They include the words for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. A common mnemonic device used to remember the coordinating conjunctions is fanboys. A subordinating conjunction connects a dependent clause to an independent clause. There are many words that can function as subordinating conjunctions in the English language. Common examples include although, because, in order to, once, since, though, and unless. All right, now let's discuss the 4 types of sentence structure with all this in mind. A simple sentence is one independent clause. My hat is blue is an example. A compound sentence is 2 or more independent clauses that are joined by a coordinating conjunction or semicolon. My hat is blue and my shoes are white is an example. My hat is blue is independent. My shoes are white is also independent. The comma plus the conjunction and correctly join the 2 independent clauses. A complex sentence contains 1 independent and at least 1 dependent clause that are joined by a subordinating conjunction. My shoes are brown because they are covered in mud is an example. My shoes are brown is independent. Because they are covered in mud is dependent. The word because is the subordinating conjunction that joins them together. A compound complex sentence contains at least 2 independent clauses and at least 1 dependent clause. My hat is blue and my shoes are brown because they are covered in mud is an example. My hat is blue and my shoes are brown because they are covered in mud are both independent clauses. Because they are covered in mud is the dependent clause. Let's practice identifying sentence type. After they ate dinner, Zoe and Gavin watched a movie together. This sentence is an example of which of the following? A, simple sentence. B, compound sentence. C, complex sentence. D, compound complex sentence. First, identify the clauses. This sentence has one independent clause. Zoe and Gavin watched a movie together. And one dependent clause. After they ate dinner. A simple sentence has one subject, one verb, and is a complete thought. This example has an independent and a dependent clause. A compound sentence has at least two independent clauses. Since our first clause cannot stand alone as a sentence, this sentence is not compound. A complex sentence contains an independent clause and at least one dependent clause. This looks right, but let's check D. A compound complex sentence has two independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. As we've seen, this example has one independent clause and one dependent clause.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused as to why that was necessary. Do they ask you questions about syntax and sentence structure? That's new for me regarding the PPR. I mean, but I'm happy to see it. I'm an English teacher at heart, so I'm happy to see everybody learning proper grammar. But I didn't know that that was necessary. But what about making real world connections? So very important when we are teaching to try to make those connections to things that exist in the student's real life. That makes it more authentic. That makes it more, it solidifies it more in our brains, just like it solidifies it more in your brains when we're talking about something and you've experienced it in real life in the classroom. It solidifies it even deeper than when we can make those connections. And so as much as possible, and honestly, the our biggest tasks as teachers are like exist if we're talking about the exam in domain one, in standard one, in our planning, what we're thinking about doing, what we know about our students, and how we need to present the information to them, and what supports we need to make sure are in place so that our students are successful. So, this section is talking about making those real world connections to what we're actually learning. It's easy for me because you guys are in the, in the teaching field or getting your toes wet in the teaching field. But with when you're in the classroom and you're just dealing with their experience, you have to reach to make those connections between what we're learning and what they're doing, what they've known and what we're doing.
The more students can connect classroom lessons to their own lives, the more interested they'll be to learn them. One of the best ways to engage students in learning is to make instruction meaningful and relevant to them. There are countless ways for teachers to make real-world connections to their lessons. In fact, it's practically required in order to get students engaged. They need to understand why it's a lesson that needs to be learned, and it's on the scope and sequence, or because it will be on the test, is not going to do.
Yes, it's not enough to just say, okay, guys, they want us to do this. We have to like show them. And that's why I always use the analogy of instead of like a lesson trailer, it's like almost like a movie trailer. And that's why I use the analogy of the lesson trailer. So you have to build it up. And in that build up, it's not willy-nilly build up, just like introducing you to the subject. It is purposeful vocabulary development, showing you things that make connections to what you already know. All of that takes place in the lesson trailer. And what that does is put our students in a better position to do well in the activities we have planned, to understand the text better, to understand the concepts better. And so the amount that we put in before, and that's why I always show like that. I'll show it at the end. I haven't shown it in a while in the beginning, but I show this meme and it's like an iceberg and it's what you see on the top is what you think teaching is. But like everything, which is the biggest portion of it, is underneath. And that's all of your thinking prior to it and looking and trial and error with different students to make sure you get them exactly what it is that they need. But first and foremost, you have to know them and you need to try to make some connections between what you are teaching and what they live every day outside. Making those connections are going to resonate the best with them.
Much for their engagement. Let's go through some examples of how a real world connection makes the content more meaningful and relevant to students. Studying persuasive writing and language arts, have students write a letter to the principal about a club or event they would like to see added to their campus. Learning how to add and subtract decimals in math class, assign students a budget or set starting amount and let them practice by picking items from a popular store catalog.
So I just want to take time to highlight one of my past students, maybe about 5 years ago. He was a um, life skills teacher at a campus in Austin ISD. And he came up with this because everybody drinks coffee on the campus. But before they started the project, they did a survey, and the children in the life skills surveyed people. They practiced their oral language skills, asking them, like, do you drink coffee every day? They were asking the employees, the faculty. That's who their first thing was at. The only one was. And so they got like, yes, they buy it. Yes, they would buy it from school if it was available. And then they did the math on how many people would like based on what it was this whole program that he built, and the students, life skills students, were learning how to do math, learning how to budget, learning how to shop because they got authorization to like take weekly trips to HEB to get the supplies that they needed based on what they had. And my goodness, the things that he did just using math, they practiced oral language proficiency, they were practicing economics. I mean, they were just like practicing so much. And it was just from one little project. So, but making it real where they went out and did real things, they talked to real people, they had there was a real outcome, they had real profits at the end of the week that they added to their pile. And these are all students who were, again, life skills, which means we are teaching them to do a lot of things. And this was by far of all of my intern students, special ed, the best program built that was interdisciplinary and that I saw the most growth with. And it was because it was absolutely every day. It was real world. It was a real thing that they were really doing. And they had to like go to Walmart every week to keep it up. And it was a very, very cool thing to see.
They can add up the prices of their desired items, then subtract their total from their budget to see how much they have left over. Time to teach students about the circulatory system in science. Students could find their pulse and record the number of beats per minute after sitting at their desks. Then they could jog in place for 1 minute and record the beats again to compare the difference.
Another one for math, just an example of how we try to like make real world. Let's say we're doing angles in mathematics and they begin that in elementary. We can go and learn about right angles and find right angles in the building. Like I could say, okay, my class is going to do a field trip and we're going to go out on the playground and we're going to look for right angles. We're going to look for isosceles. I'm going to tell them, and they're going to find in the real world, even if it's in branches, even if it's in a tree, and they see that, doesn't that look like an isosceles? It absolutely. And what makes an isosceles? Oh, well, it's less than this. Okay, so that absolutely, that is more meaningful than me showing them, I don't know how many examples on PowerPoint, me taking them out into the world, which is their campus, and looking for angles just anywhere on the basketball court, like when you open a door, or it can only open this much, and the most it can open is this much. And so, um, taking it outside of the classroom, transmuting what we are doing to so that they can shine the bright light that it goes beyond us and in the real world, that's always going to be best practice. Always, every day, all the time, gonna be the right answer.
Do students need to know map features in social studies? That's the perfect opportunity for students to create their own legend to represent the items in the classroom and use the legend to make a class map. Let's hear a few tips for making classroom activities meaningful and relevant to students. Introduce the lesson or unit with a real-world application. Teachers can circle back to relevance throughout the unit, but it's especially beneficial to highlight it at the start to set students' purpose for learning. If students are having trouble
Always try to set their purpose for learning. Like, setting the purpose for learning during the day, like, okay, guys, we're going to be looking at diction. Okay, guys, we're going to be looking at this. Setting the purpose for learning just helps. It's the difference between going into a dark room and a room that's lit up. I don't know where I can go and sit. If it's dark, I don't even know. I can't even see anything. Where am I going with this? So setting a purpose for the learning, it's a small thing that you can do to help your students be successful, because they need to have a direction with which to point. What is the end goal here? What is my purpose here? This is not just best practice for our ELL students. This is best practice for everyone.
relating to the material because of a lack of background knowledge, give it to them. It's okay if some background knowledge must be built for the new material to become meaningful to students. Build the background knowledge, then help students find the connections to their own life.
Not everyone comes to our classes with prior knowledge. It's not always going to be the case that you can just activate prior knowledge and boom, we enter this instruction. No, sometimes your students lack prior knowledge, and that's like honestly very common when you're learning about new things, right? If possible, if the teacher has made a connection to something that you've known before, awesome. But very often it is our job, and it's not just the teaching portion of it, it's how do you introduce this? What barriers are you removing to my understanding of instruction, to my understanding of the text, to my understanding of the activity, to all of it? Background knowledge, so very important. It's like a movie trailer. You're either going to go watch the movie or not. You're going to be successful or not based on how much you know and how much is supported there.
Lives. When appropriate, seek student input or offer choice. When students have a say in what they study, as in the questions answered during a research project or the books they get to read, it greatly increases their engagement in class.
So we know from domain one, standard one, what that says that we have to know how to motivate our students, that the best way to motivate your students is to give them a choice, is to give them something they are already interested in. And if they make a choice, it is them saying, I'm interested in this over this. So you don't have to give them a choice out of 100. You can give them a choice out of 3. Out of those 3, they've said, I am more interested in this. That choice, that input, very, very important. Like I've mentioned many times, our students, the burgeoning humans that they are, they don't have a lot of say in their lives, and they need to have practice making choice based on their self-assessment of what I'm going to be good at. Offering them things that they're interested in and choice, always going to be beneficial, always going to be best practice. That is the fastest way to get their motivation on something, is giving them a choice. I think about my first research paper that I had to write, and it was in 5th grade in Austin ISD. And I remember my teacher took us to the library and she put all these books expository text on a long, like several tables that were next to each other long. And we just walked around and we chose. And I chose Harriet Tubman. Honestly, I chose her because some of my peers were making fun of her, and the picture on the front of the book. And so I read it, and I I chose her out of everyone, and then I just became a crazy person. Like, Harriet Tubman is like a literally a phenom, chingona, awesome person, and I'm still a fangirl of her. But I made that choice, even though the choice was limited and it was amongst a whole bunch of people I didn't know, because I made that choice. Like, I've still stuck by that choice all the way till today, and I'm super proud of it. My point is that student choice is important. Let them walk amongst the people and decide, who am I going to delve in? Who am I going to show my skills with? Offering them choice increases their motivation, increases their output and their engagement. And honestly, if I am a testament to anything, we're going at 42 years strong, and Harriet Tubman is still the strongest lady that I've ever heard of.
Keep your instruction learner-centered. One of the best ways to keep instruction meaningful to students is by keeping them in the center of it. For example, when teaching students how to play a new game, the teacher could A, show a video about the game, B, demonstrate the game, C, discuss the game, or D, have students try the game while explaining how to.
What do you guys think? This is a super easy question. This is a learner-centered way to teach students. What can we eliminate? Because this is absolutely not the best way to do it.
Showing the video.
Showing just a video about the game. They're not even playing it. There's no experience there at all.
Eliminate C.
Yeah, just talking about it with the students. That's not it.
I'm between B and D because like I do, we do, you do, or something like that would be starting off demonstrating. But like I think the best thing would be for the students to have hands on.
Yeah,
So I
remember
like D.
the
Oh,
key word is most, and when you see most, it's like, ooh, be nervous. Most or best?
yeah,
Learner-centered, learner-centered. So of these two, which are more learner-centered? Where the student is the most important person in the scenario.
I would say D as in dog.
Yeah, I think so too. What are you guys thinking? Let me check the chat. People are saying D. Let's see. I agree with you guys because it's learner-centered.
Play it. The best answer is D. Having students try
There you
the
go,
game
guys.
while learning how to play is the learner-centered option. This is because
That
it
key
keeps the
word,
students
learner-centered.
and their involvement at the center of the instructional activity. So remember, instruction is meaningful and relevant to students when they are in the center of it and know how it relates to their lives. Teachers should help bridge the gap between the classroom and the real world.
All right. Any questions about how we make why it's important that we make our lessons meaningful and relevant to our students as much as possible? When they are
Right.
at the, uh-huh.
The why seems to be easy, but the how is the secret sauce.
The
Like how do you do
how
that?
in reality is the secret sauce, and very, very hard. The how theoretically is going to be less difficult for you guys but what I need you to understand about this exam is that it's best practice, and it is like perfect world scenario. Theoretically, should we be able to do these things? Absolutely, no problems asked. We have the support of the principals, the support of the parents. We have all of the funding, all of the materials. It is what should happen. This exam is based on what should happen. We know that making this come to fruition, it's really hard. Like making sure, I'm telling you, as somebody who fancies herself an expert educator, it is hard to do student-centered learning every single day. There has to be direct instruction. There has to be me telling you some things that you don't know, that you don't are not learning on your own. So 100% student-centered instruction, very, very difficult to come by. Is it the most meaningful for them? Absolutely. Is it always possible for us? No. Is it our goal? Yes. We are, and that should be for this exam, best practice, what you are choosing, what our goal should be. It should never be what I'm going to actually do in my classroom because of the limitations of the world. This exam is purely theoretical. And it is in theory, this is what should take place. Okay, let's talk about higher order thinking skills. And we want everyone to be existing at this level, the highest level. But we also know a whole bunch of things go in there. We know about Maslow's theory. If they're not eating or sleeping, they're not going to be thinking at the highest level of thinking. They're not at the self-actualization process of another theory that's necessary for this theory to work. So, making sure that we provide our students with the support to be able to reach the cognition we need them to do, and then also the activities where we're not just having them recall and not just doing those baseline thinking skills that we are, building it up.
It is a teacher's role to stimulate high order thinking from students. While this task is easier said than done, there are strategies to use to encourage this in the classroom. Teachers must first remember that in all classrooms, the levels of ability will vary among students. Students will also have different backgrounds and interests. Teachers should include a broad range of diverse content in order to pique the interest of all students.
And that's differentiation. People are like get nervous with vocabulary. Differentiation is you have thought about your people in your classroom, your audience for instruction, and you have differentiated, you have provided different supports necessary based on their skill level, their proficiency, whatever the case may be. You have provided different things in your lesson. You have differentiated it to make it accessible to everyone.
Moreover, a broad range of strategies and techniques should be applied to reach the diverse learners. Though it is easy to fall into comfortable patterns, effective teaching requires varied instructional techniques like discussion, inquiry, and problem-based learning. Strategies to promote student engagement and learning include structuring lessons effectively, using flexible instructional groupings, pacing lessons flexibly in response to student needs.
So, effective lesson structure, that means that you have done enough building background knowledge. You have done enough, and you're right, there's an I do, we do, you do. If it is something that you are teaching to them new, it is a new skill, absolutely you're going to start with I do. I do, and then it's we do, and then it's you do. But if it's something that they already know, maybe you provide a challenge and it's we do them and you're walking around. So, flexible lesson and grouping. With your grouping, you need to be mindful of maximizing the resource of the group for the people that are in it. Are they getting the maximum benefit, language practice wise, like being with different people, seeing different perspectives, getting what they need, taking that flexible viewing, and also flexible pacing, because there are going to be times when some students don't understand and there needs to be reteach, or there needs to be something that happens, more explanatory something. Another example that maybe I gave 10 examples, but 10 wasn't enough. And it took not just 11, but 12. But I did the 11 and 12, and I took the time for everyone to do 11 and 12, finding that flexible pacing, but being mindful of your students' needs. And that's really what it's about. checking for understanding and seeing, okay, do they need an extra example? Do they need two extra examples before we move on? And I feel confident that they're proficient doing this individually.
Including wait time, and age-appropriate instruction that encourages higher-order thinking skills. Prompt students to explore ideas from diverse perspectives and structure active learning experience involving cooperative learning, problem solving, and open-ended questioning. When answering questions about higher-level thinking, look for choices that require students to do something with the content or explain their thinking about it, not just spit out facts. Let's talk about leading effective student discussions. Great teachers ask questions that encourage student thinking. Skilled questioning prompts students to think carefully about issues while engaging them on an appropriate level. Effective leadership in discussion moves the conversation deeper while keeping a clear focus on the topic. It can also adjust to the interests of the students while keeping the instructional content and learning goals in mind.
So I have worked with all sorts of teachers, and it is one of my greatest prides in my life to help the new generation of teachers be effective in the classroom. I do not want you, and I will be so disappointed if you go through a lesson, a class period without checking for understanding. There should be multiple checks for understanding. You should have questions that you can ask at any point in the lesson to just see where is everybody at. And if you do not take out those markers to check for understanding, take out those points to check for understanding, you are not going to know what your students need. And they're not going to get what they need from your instruction. You have got to be assessing their understanding, especially if they're emergent bilingual. Always and especially if they're special ed or emergent bilingual, but you should be doing it for everyone all day, anytime, no matter what. Checking for understanding multiple times throughout the lesson, which means that there is a question that you ask and you get feedback from that you're going to take into consideration as to the depth of their knowledge, the depth of their comprehension of what we talked about. I have worked with and also supervised teachers that do not check for understanding. You are putting yourself in a world of trouble because you are going to be stuck at the end of the marking period with students who are failing and who are not meeting their mark if you are not actively checking for understanding and making the adjustments to your instruction. That's why it's flexible. So standard one is very important and domain three is very important because that's when we do it and we do the like assessing and we add everything and we're checking for understanding. But then we always have to go back to the drawing board, undoubtedly, and it's not a failure on your part. Our science experiment is with human beings. We give a hypothesis every single lesson. We write a hypothesis. Our students are going to be able to do this. The student is expected to be able to do this before. It is a hypothesis based on a whole bunch of different humans with a whole bunch of different support systems coming even with different belly fill, like different hunger levels. And we are meant to get everyone to be on the same level, the same success level. And it can happen. It can, but you have to be mindful and you have to pick up the pieces sometimes where there are pieces to be picked. But not assessing, not doing your due diligence at the not just at the end of your lesson, but like during your lesson, during the thick of it, during the conversations, during those poignant questions or after those poignant questions that you've asked. Very, very important to us being able to be impactful. Let me go back to where we were.
Handle incorrect answers with care. Scaffold learning by asking clarifying questions if students do not know how to answer the original question. Remain open to various perspectives on the topic.
So, one of the things that I did in my classroom to make it to where I expected everyone to be able to, like, everybody's learning. Like, you might not know, and that might be the answer you want to give me, but that's not acceptable because obviously you don't know. That's literally why we're here. So, I don't know is never an acceptable response to me. There are people here who know, you have partners next to you who know, and so you can phone a friend. It might be across the room, and you're gonna have to walk over there, take 10 minutes out of not 10 minutes, 10 seconds out of our time to walk over there and whisper, but you yourself are going to formulate the words in your brain and say them to me. It's necessary for me. You cannot opt out. We're like, it's not okay to say I don't know. That's the point. We're here. Sometimes we don't know, but there are people who do, and we're going to find it, and we're going to all learn together. That's the job. So making sure that you have those things in place. It also reinforces high expectations. Like, you're not just going to come here and we're not just going to slide. You're going to learn things, even if you have to get it from somebody else. We have to wait for you to do it. It's going to happen. We're going to learn something. You're going to learn it today. I guarantee you're not going to forget what you had to go and hear from somebody else. Like, holding people responsible and letting them know that it's okay to not know the answer. There are people who do, and it's cool. We'll just have a little conversation and then you'll tell me and explain to everyone because that's what we're here for, to learn.
And provide time for students to discuss in a pair first. This can be less intimidating for students and is commonly referred to as a think, pair, share.
You already know how much I love Think Pair Share, but it's so good for our emergent bilingual and our special ed students, especially if you carefully craft your seating and who's going to think pair share together so that, someone who maybe beginner is also with an advanced high who speaks their native language. And it doesn't always work out that way, but that's the way we try to make it happen. And think pair shares are always beneficial because you get to negotiate in a like low risk scenario. It's like me and my peer, me and my homie, we're just talking about some things before I have to go talk to la maestra about it. And it makes you feel a little bit better, more confident. And it has been my professional experience that the more I infused think pair shares, the more my students wanted to participate in whole group instruction, the more they understood the things, even if I didn't go back and ask whole group instruction that same question. They just understood it better and then negotiated with their peers. And that's not for nothing. I didn't just pair them with anyone. It was carefully crafted so they got maximum benefit out of their speaking and listening engagements in class.
Group discussion is a great way to stimulate higher order thinking about topics in class. Students must know what to do and feel comfortable enough to share their thinking in a safe environment.
What do you guys think about group work right now? I haven't been in the classroom as a teacher of record after COVID. So I'm curious to hear your real world explanations of what's going on regarding group work, regarding the class. Nobody wants to step in that. The COVID aftermath is a big pile of something, but something is going on a little bit. And I've heard it buzzed from my students that there's something happening in the classrooms where what normally would work is struggling to work. We already talked about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation in domain 1 in those modules, but it bears repeating. And the most important of the two is which one? Which is the most important? Intrinsic or impactful? Not important, impactful. What is more impactful? Intrinsic or extrinsic? Somebody tell me. And tell me why. What's more impactful to a student? There's two types, just In totality, in the world, there are two types of motivation. It's either intrinsic, which is internal, or it's extrinsic, which is external. And I wanted to highlight those so that you remember the vocabulary. But we have the word in here and ex, which is like think external. X and in. Of the two, if you had to guess, which is going to be more impactful for our students and their learning, internally or externally?
Internally.
Absolutely. Intrinsic motivation, internal, is the most impactful. And it's the hardest one to reach because it's inside the student. How do you motivate someone inside themselves? Well, one of the easy ways, which we've talked about a lot, is giving them choices. When you give them a choice, even if it's like an example I gave of my own with Harriet Tubman, it was a choice of nobody's. I didn't know anybody. It was like nobody I knew. And then I walked down the line, had conversation with peers, listened to them, and then made my choice based on who I am internally and what I want to do. And that was impactful. And I literally put everything into that in my first research paper ever. Internal is more impactful than external. What are some examples of external motivation that we could give students, like an external motivation?
Like some free time or
Free time,
something like
yeah, a little free time, a reward, which is like free time, a sticker, hot Cheetos and cheese on a Friday at the end of the week. Like all of those things are outside of themselves. To build intrinsic motivation, you have to deal with the student internally, giving them choices, allowing them to take autonomy over their activity, meaning I dictate what I'm going to learn about or who I'm going to tell you about. That internal, just that little seed is so important. When it's something that they're already interested in, like this is a favorite of mine, no, but that they go off the charts. Do you take it even further?
the
Um,
way I word that is taking ownership. So
Absolutely.
I
Taking
take ownership
ownership.
of like the campuses, like making sure their networks working, their computers are working, all the
Yes.
issues that the people are like. I take ownership of it. I'm responsible to solve their problems. Like that, like, I feel that's taking ownership is a phrase.
Absolutely. No, it really is. And honestly, apart from the ownership is their ability to feel like progressively like they're growing or succeeding because those little wins, and if we don't point them out, like maldita on us, like it's like literally a dereliction of duty, but finding ways to identify when students are growing, even if it's minusculely, and providing them with the positive reinforcement for the effort, for the growth, that builds an internal love of learning. Learning to do something good and being good at something feels good. And the students all want to feel like that. No student wants to feel like they're bad at math or they can't do the skill. That's not a fun place for any human to be, least of all children. They don't want to be there. We just have to find creative ways to get them where they need to be and provide them with opportunities to do challenging things to build the skills that they need. Once they have an internal love of learning, just simply like I like doing hard stuff and I like learning. Once they have that, no, hombre, we don't even have to give them things of choice. They will just learn simply for the pleasure of learning. But it's difficult for to get students there, and we do have to work with them and give them bite-sized opportunities, activities where they are going to feel competent, where they are going to feel masterful. You chase that masterfulness feeling. You chase that feeling of accomplishment. However small it begins, you chase it, and that's what we do with our students. And that's I'm getting worried, guys, because we're already at the end of class and we haven't finished. But Domain 3 is also one of the largest sections, so it's not going to be as small as Domain 2. It has one of the highest weights of the domains, right? It's second weighted as the most high. And it has domain one, excuse me, standard one, standard three, and technology application standards 1 through 7 in domain three. So it's a lot to cover. So I think we're just going to end it here. We'll dive back, we'll start back in, we'll revisit student motivation, and then speak about effective communication. Vocabulary, so important for instruction. If your students don't know what's being said, they're not going to understand the concept. So, vocabulary instruction, integral to all of our content areas. We'll be finishing with that and semantics on Wednesday. Are there any questions today, guys?
No, thank you.
No, Miss Sauceda.
Okay, well, we'll finish up on Wednesday. We'll be able to finish up these 3 different sections, and then we'll go through the practice questions, which will give us a run for our money because we haven't seen them before, and so it'll be fun. I always enjoy looking at new questions with you, so we'll look at those. And then we'll go on to the next section of domain 3 within 240. And I believe I will be going on vacation. I haven't taken a vacation in like 7 years. So long. I've worked Christmas, Thanksgiving, but I will be taking a vacation. I'm going to Puerto Rico with the girls, and so we're gonna go swim with manatees and bioluminescent things. And from the 19th to the 27th, I will be incommunicado. Not really. If you really need me, just text me. But we won't have PPR classes. So, but I am gonna have I'm gonna have some videos for you to watch and some things for you to do in the meantime while I'm gone. I'm not gonna leave you empty-handed. You will look at some of the old videos and think of I'll ask you some poignant questions on those. So you'll have that to sort of gnaw on until I get back. But I'm not going anywhere until the 19th. So I will see you again on Wednesday. Have a beautiful rest of your weekend, guys.